I call David Clendon.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd have to begin by saying that if ever a government has sat in this House on the last sitting day of a year with egg liberally smeared on its face, this is the day and this is that government. So the announcement today that the contract with Serco would not be renewed at Mount Eden is an admission of a failure. It is a failure that has been predicted, that was predictable. It has been glaringly obvious to everybody but the Minister and the government that Serco had failed at Mount Eden. And the fact that we have delayed effectively 6 months to make this announcement, to begin to terminate this contract, has exacerbated that problem, made it worse. So it's most unfortunate that the Minister and the government took such a long time to concede that their privatisation model has failed. It has failed badly, and we should learn from that and acknowledge it. So the failure was predictable, as I've said, and I'd like to quote briefly from the Hansard. I quote, "The Green Party remains absolutely opposed to this legislation. It is not evidence-based. It is ideological. It is dangerous to the community, to staff, to prisoners, and it will increase costs to the public purse." So that was my colleague Matiria Toure in November 2009, speaking to the Corrections Contract Management of Prison Amendment Bill. So that was a legislation ushered in by the once and future Corrections Minister Collins, that enabled this fiasco to emerge, that enabled the private management of New Zealand's prisons. It has failed badly. That failure should be acknowledged. Unfortunately, what we saw earlier today was I think indefensible excuses made on Serco's behalf for why they have failed so badly. We were told, well, remand prisons are different. They're hard prisons to manage. We were told that there was an unexpectedly high muster that nobody anticipated when the contract was signed in 2010. We're told that it's a very difficult place to manage, and of course Serco have been up against it, so now we need to put corrections in to clean up the mess. That language is remarkably at odds with the language we heard when the contract was announced, and that we've continued to hear about Serco, about their wonderful expertise and long experience in prison management, about how they're innovative, world-class prison managers. So about the only innovation we've seen at Mount Eden is a rather unfortunate innovation. Effectively, Serco have raised their hands and handed control of that prison over to the inmates. In terms of behaviour, in terms of management, they've simply relinquished their responsibilities. They've done their level best to disguise what has been going on there. Corrections, unfortunately, has also failed badly in that their monitoring of what was going on in that prison and the monitoring built into the contract conditions has also failed badly. The fact that young people, that teenagers, were being locked down 23 out of 24 hours a day was not picked up by those monitors. There was something seriously amiss if the levels of violence, of contraband, of drug use in the prison was not spotted by corrections. They have to bear some blame for this. The fact that Serco was unable to carry on failing in their duty to operate a safe, humane, secure prison is evidence that there was a generic and overall failure in that place. So there was an opportunity, at least as long ago as July, to accelerate the termination of this contract. We had what can only be described as an attempted tutorial on contract law from the Minister a few moments ago. Had he read that contract a little more closely, he would have noticed that there were clear grounds for termination. We stood in this House in July and asked him why he had not issued a final warning to Serco. Another performance notice after that time would have enabled him to immediately terminate that contract. Instead, we hear again this litany of excuses about why this appalling situation could emerge and why it's been able to be dragged out for the last 6 months and why it's going to continue for another 14 months. So we heard the Minister make some comments about the cost to the public purse. I have endeavoured through my office, through QWAs and the like, to find out what has been the cost to the public purse of the step-in procedure. How much more is it costing New Zealanders to have corrections in there trying to clean up the mess, while Serco continues to be paid out the amount determined in their contract? That additional cost has been borne in terms of people. How are those people being replaced in the public service? Is it because we're paying more overtime to the other hard-working prison officers? Those those answers have not been forthcoming, but we know that any costs that might have been reduced, or any efficiencies allegedly that Serco has produced over the previous several years, have long since been chewed up by the cost of cleaning up this mess, and apparently we're to wait another 14 months before we see the back of it. So our colleague Kelvin Davison, he's to be congratulated, I believe, on his unrelenting attention to this issue, for having revealed some of the worst abuses suffered by inmates and staff alike in that prison. He made the point about staffing, sir. The private prison model will always fail to produce safe, humane and secure prisons, for one very simple reason. There is only one means by which a private operator can extract profit from a prison, and that is to reduce the number of staff working in it, to reduce their wages and conditions. And Mr Lotuenga might rail at length about the iniquities of unions and the like. The reality is that we need well-paid, ample numbers of staff in our prisons who have high morale in order that they can continue to do well the very hard daily grinding work of being on the ground in the units, engaging with inmates, getting a sense when there's tension building up, seeking to diffuse that tension before it boils over into violence. This is what well-trained, well-resourced and experienced prison officers can do when the morale is high, when they have good commitment to their task. None of those characteristics are present in a private prison typically. You'll look at the average age profile, the experience profile, the payments made to them. Inevitably, you'll see a reduction in quality of service that links directly to increased outbreaks of violence, increased outbreaks of contraband, all those negative things we've seen at Mount Eden. I thought it most unfortunate that the Minister saw fit to denigrate and to speak ill of the unions. Between CANS and PSA, I think the majority of those 8,000 employees he talked about in our prisons are actually, for the most part, union members. And there's a very good reason why those sites should be unionised, to ensure that they are well resourced, that they are well enough paid. And I thought that it was very unfortunate that the Minister saw fit to denigrate those very hard-working men and women in our prisons who do actually put themselves at risk by intervening, by seeking to reduce outbreaks of violence, but ultimately they are in the front line, and when things go wrong, as they inevitably must, because we are dealing with difficult people, I think it's most unfortunate that the Minister saw fit to speak ill of those people and the organisation that represents them. So I won't sort of repeat again the litany of errors we've seen from Serco. I think we can only speculate. I had imagined that they would provide for the first several years of that contract a gold-plated service, because that is the experience we've seen overseas. Private operators get into the public sector, they over-deliver for a number of years, get themselves thoroughly embedded and entrenched, and then they start winding back, and then they start making their profits and generating. They do take a long view of that. In this instance, as I say, I can only speculate, but I think it's fair to speculate that given the parlous financial state of the UK-based parent company, Serco, the message has gone out to New Zealand and indeed to Australia. We need the cash. Get the cash out of that investment as soon as you possibly can. And I believe this is a direct result of that imperative to generate as much money as possible in the shortest amount of time. Understaffing, failure to put replacement staff when Serco staff have gone ill or have taken leave. We have very credible reports that this has been commonplace. Serco already operate on a much lower staff to inmate ratio than the public service. When people take leave, when they're ill, and often it's stress related, those people have not been replaced. They have not succeeded in running a safe, secure, humane prison, nor can they. The sooner this government accepts that and returns its back on this flawed, ideologically driven privatisation model, the sooner we can return to sanity and to safety. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.